Welcome to another edition of Windsor Teaches World War II. In previous lessons, we've talked about the Nazis, Nazi policies, how the Nazis rose to power. We also talked about the causes of World War II and the Battle of Britain in the previous lesson. So you could consider what we're going to study today, the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Britain, the main turning point in World War II. In the Battle of Britain, the idea of the Nazis was that they launched Operation Sea Lion and they tried to fight off the British RAF to make space for their landing on the south coast of England with their German army. They were fortunately unsuccessful thanks to the RAF pilots. Today we're going to be looking at another turning point in World War II. So it turns again even more so against the Nazis at this point, who up until kind of around the Battle of Britain, been very, very successful, in particular the taking of France within the space of a couple of months. So before we begin today's lesson, what I'd like you to do is just make 3 columns on your page, and I'd like you to think about any key details about each of these 3 headings. So the most recent Battle of Britain, so that should be the easiest to recall. Slightly further away in the past was the causes of World War II, and even further away from that into the past was Nazis getting into power. So you might want to start with Battle of Britain first. In each of these columns, I want you to make a list of everything that you remember about each part of the World War II story in the correct column. So pause the video now and give that a go. We'll go over the answers in just a few moments. Okay, so you've had a chance to think about that. Let's see some key ideas to do with World War II so far in this topic. So we'll work backwards from the Battle of Britain. So the Battle of Britain on the Nazi end, the Nazis called it Operation Sea Lion, although they would have called it that in German since they spoke German. But to us, it's called Operation Sea Lion. They wanted to cross over to Britain, but in order for that to happen, they had to defeat the British Royal Air Force to clear the way for their ground troops to cross over via boats. They'd be literally sitting ducks for the British bombers and fighter planes to come and shoot their boats. So they had to get rid of the Royal Air Force first. British planes, the Spitfires, were superior to the German counterpart of fighter jets. They were called Messerschmitts, and Spitfires were superiorly engineered. They were also equipped with radar, which allowed for the British pilots to fight at night and know where the German aircraft were. Germans bombed cities instead of air force bases, giving Britain a chance to recover and fight back. So the initial plan was to bomb the air force bases. Hermann Goering, a leader of the Luftwaffe, the German air force, decided that after the bombing of certain districts of Berlin, they were going to take revenge on British cities, and that perhaps was one of their biggest mistakes. Had they continued to bomb air force bases, they might very well have won the Battle of Britain. So let's think about causes of World War II now. So the invasion of Poland, I guess you could suppose that would be the trigger cause, the short-term cause of World War II. However, there are a bunch of long-term causes as well. So the policy of appeasement, Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister at that time, whenever Hitler demanded something, decided to give in to those demands. And what happened was it actually encouraged Hitler to be more aggressive because he would get what he asked for. And each time he'd come back with a greater and greater demand each time, eventually precipitated World War II. Also, aggressive Nazi expansion policies. It's called Lebensraum, or living space, in other words. Hitler decided that the German people needed more living space, and so they begin conquering territories, or taking over the territories around Germany, such as Czechoslovakia and Poland eventually. So, Nazis getting into power. How did the Nazis get into power? Well, nationalism is when you think that your country is the greatest country and you're willing to prove it by going to war and taking over other countries. And so Hitler inspired great nationalism by saying that he wanted to make Germany great again. He used the public's hatred of the Treaty of Versailles. It's a humiliating treaty. They had to give up land, give up a lot of their army, limited to only 100,000 men. They had to give up lots of money to repair for the damages, which sent the country into quite a deep spell of poverty. And also, they had to accept blame for World War I as well. I think perhaps that last term of the treaty was the most humiliating. Hitler blamed the communists for the Reichstag fire and executed his rivals. So the German parliament building sets on fire, and Hitler uses the opportunity to blame his political rivals, the communists, rounds up their leaders and executes them. And in one fell swoop, he's got rid of his political rivals. There are rumors circulating that a member of the Nazi party is the one who started the Reichstag fire. So a very clever piece of political maneuvering there. He gets rid of enemies in the army during the Night of the Long Knives. The Nazis have a personal army called the SA, but the German army don't trust the leaders of the SA. So one night, Hitler decides to round up the leaders of the SA and have them executed, and then the German army no longer have a problem with joining forces with Hitler. Okay, so if you didn't have those, you now have a chance to write them down on your sheet of paper. It's worthwhile because this is some key information about the past lessons in this scheme of World War II. Okay, so what are we going to be learning about today? We're going to be learning about the Battle of Stalingrad, which took place in Russia. How we're going to do it, you're going to use a bit of scholarship, so someone who knows what he's talking about, and some additional info as well. Why are we going to do that? Well, we're going to see how and why the Nazi war machine began to grind to a halt. And I don't mean Nazi war machine as in a literal massive machine made for war. I mean as in the German army generals, the whole organization that kind of make the war in Germany. So the whole of the army in essence. So let's crack on. So, first of all, let's go over some key terms. So, the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is a city in Russia. You can see from this picture in the bottom right-hand side of the screen that it is to the southeast of Moscow, Russian capital city. Barbarossa is the name of this operation. So, Battle of Britain was called Operation Sea Lion. The German invasion of Russia is called Operation Barbarossa. In order to achieve this, they used their strategy of blitzkrieg, so using short, fast, and powerful attacks with planes, weapons, and troops and tanks as well to defeat an enemy. It's the same strategy that Germany used in taking over France with a particular piece of medical aid called Pervitin, which was a methamphetamine distributed in the German army. It is said that something like 3 million capsules of Pervitin were taken by one army group in Operation Barbarossa. So Stalin was the leader of the Russian army. This is the Joseph Stalin in the top right-hand corner. He was the dictator of Russia at the time. So two countries right next to each other have dictators. We've got Hitler in Germany and we've got Stalin in Russia. And you're probably thinking, well, if they're both dictators, why can't they get on? Well, history tells us that if you have two dictators, they are not going to be friends. Their egos, their own self-worth get in the way, and they both believe that there can be only one. And so for that reason, dictators rarely get on, and they very, very rarely still work together. So the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943, one of the key turning points of World War II. Before the start of the war, Hitler made an agreement with Russia that they would not go to war. This was known as the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The Soviet means Russians. However, in 1941, after Hitler had decided not to invade Britain, he turned his attention east to Russia. So you can consider this as a result of not being able to defeat the RAF properly. The German army attacked quickly as part of Operation Barbarossa, using a tactic called blitzkrieg or lightning warfare, which led them to quickly push the Russian army back far into Russia. By autumn of 1941, Russia had been pushed back to many of its major cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. The Russian army was trapped in a city named after its leader, Stalingrad. So Stalingrad, Grad means city, Stalin means of Stalin. Okay, so one of the key things about this operation is that the Nazi war generals came up with a plan quite sensibly to attack Moscow, which is Russia's capital city. So the German generals wanted to attack Moscow. However, Hitler decided that he would much rather split the army, with half of it going north towards Leningrad and some of it going down towards Ukraine, towards Stalingrad. Now, this wasn't a particularly good idea, as it would actually split the army into a few different groups and make it less powerful than if it had attacked all at once. Another key thing is that the army is now spread out over a large distance rather than concentrated in one area, which again makes the army itself a lot weaker than it should be. The next target of Nazi Germany was the Soviet Union, which is Russia. Having expanded west into France as far as the English Channel, the German advance into Britain had been ruined by the brave pilots of the RAF, who fought off the German Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, who were trying to make their way safe for Germany to cross into Britain. Nazi Germany now looked east, should say east rather than west, east into an attempt to conquer Russia. The initial plan was to go straight for Moscow with the full force of the German army, but Hitler changed the decision. The army was to try to conquer Leningrad to the north of Moscow and Stalingrad to the south as well, splitting German forces. So already before this operation starts, we can see there's already a bit of a lapse in judgment in Nazi leadership. So this is what a chap called Norman Ohler says. He wrote this book on the left there. It's called Blitz Drugs in Nazi Germany. It says, sure, Hitler's troops were winning one battle after another, but the Red Army just pretended that they hadn't noticed such setbacks, and for the first time in this war, the Germans suffered great losses within a very short time. Even the doping with Pervitin that had been given out did not bring about a quick victory. Unlike their leader, other German generals saw Moscow as their ultimate goal, but Hitler divided troops to go to Leningrad in the north and to Ukraine in the south. The weather got worse. Soldiers became stuck in persistent rain, fog, and bad roads, which all made movement difficult. Defeat was suggested for the first time, but Hitler ordered to hold the line at all costs. This, and also the fact that Hitler had not equipped the German soldiers with winter gear to keep them from freezing in the Russian winter. Okay, so before we move on, just pause this video and a quick task. I want you to summarize the problems that Norman Ohler, this chap, mentions when he's talking about Germany's campaign into Russia. That'll take only a couple of minutes. You can do that now. Okay, so a brief summary, you could say, is that some of the problems that Germany has with going into Russia, basically the Nazi leadership is divided on where they should go. The Nazi German generals have a very sensible idea of going towards Moscow. Hitler, however, who's become a little bit unstable at this point in the war, overrides the very sensible analysis of his generals and decides to split the army into 2 or 3 large groups, taking Leningrad in the north and Ukraine in the south. Not only that, but the weather is going to get very, very bad as well. It means that the German jeeps, trucks, tanks, anything that can move soldiers around are not going to be able to get through due to the really, really poor state of the roads due to the bad weather. Also, rather than retreat and save their soldiers, which is what the Nazi generals want to do, Hitler says that they must hold the line at all costs. If they run away, they can be subject to punishment or perhaps even executed as deserters of the army. That's not the only thing, though. The Russian winter can sometimes reach minus 20 degrees Celsius, and the German army are not equipped with winter gear because the Nazis thought that this campaign would only last about 3 months, and the campaign started in the late spring of summer of that year. So they thought by the time they were done, the weather would just be turning into winter and they could pull back and withdraw at that point. However, they were desperately wrong, and a lot of the German soldiers actually end up freezing because they do not have the correct winter equipment. Okay, so let's talk about the battle itself. So the Battle of Stalingrad happened in July 1942 to February 1943. It's a very long stretch of time for a battle to happen. And as you can tell, if it started in July and went through to February, it would have happened through the autumn and through the harsh Russian winter as well. The events of the battle, July 1942. At first, the Germans were destroying the Russian forces, including most of the city. Stalin had ordered for Stalingrad city not be evacuated. Over 400,000 people lived there, as he believed it would inspire the troops. In August-September 1942, the Russian army's resources and equipment were so low that they had to share guns. Some soldiers would have to charge the enemy without even having a gun. If they ran backwards, they would be shot down by their own side. The Russians were desperate, but were ordered not to step back, similar to the Germans who were ordered to hold the line at all costs. So neither side were allowed to back down. October 1942. However, the Germans had not counted on one thing, the Russian winter, where the temperature could drop down to minus 15 degrees. That's optimistic, probably about minus 20, minus 25 in some places. November of the same year, as winter set in, the German forces were unprepared. They began to freeze and were not able to effectively fight against the Russians in the ruins of the city. So the city would have been mostly ruins by this point, fallen down, dilapidated buildings, nowhere really to shelter from the cold, and it became very, very difficult, house to house, street to street fighting. November 1942, eventually Russian enforcements arrived and executed a pincer movement. Pincer movement is when one part of the army approaches from one side and the other part from the other side, effectively surrounding the German army and cutting off their supplies. February 1943, this was the first major victory for the Allies. From that point on, the Russians began to push the Germans back towards Berlin, but the battle that lasted just over 5 months had caused 1.6 million people to be killed or wounded, so a very, very high death toll. Like 1.6 million people is on both sides. Okay, so what would I like you to do with this information? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of information there. What I'd like you to do is, using a ruler and a pencil, create a storyboard, and I'd like you to have a little space underneath each picture for a caption as well. So I want you to draw a picture, and then I'd like you to underneath describe what it is that you have drawn in that picture, please. That's going to take a decent chunk of time, but probably allow yourself 15-20 minutes. But if you need more time, obviously allow for more time. You can pause this video now, or you might want to flip back to the previous slide and pause the video now. Okay, so you're probably done with your storyboard at this point, or nearing completion of it. You can always finish it once this video has ended. So the next task I'd like you to do is, we've learned a little bit about the Battle of Stalingrad. We've thought about it from Nazi and Russian perspectives. This is our next task. So what happened at Stalingrad? You need to write a letter home from a soldier's perspective. You can pick if you are a Russian soldier at the start of the Battle of Stalingrad or a German soldier at the end of the Battle of Stalingrad. Use the images to help imagine how you might feel, what it looks like, how you think the battle might end. So try and put yourself into the shoes of either a Russian or a German soldier at this point. By the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, the Germans must have felt very, very defeated. They're cold, they're probably a bit hopeless. The Pervitin that they've been given is probably for their survival more than it is for their fighting power at this rate. And the Russian forces have surrounded the German army and cut off their supply lines. The Russian soldiers at the beginning might have felt very glum about the whole thing, but they kept on retreating further and further into Russia, and basically waiting for the Germans to give up to the Russian winter. An extension, so you can use that information and all the information from this video in order to help you write that. So this is the extension. Was invading Russia Hitler's greatest mistake? Using a Peel writing frame to answer. So a point, evidence, explanation, and then link it back to the question. So P for point, E for evidence, E for explanation, and L for the link back to the question. However, there is one final task I'd like you to do when you go away today for your revision on the World War II topic, and it is this next one. It's called a flip and fold. So all you're going to need for this task, ladies and gentlemen, is a sheet of A4 paper. So let me show you how it works. This revision technique is 100% guaranteed to get you to doing active revision. So you're going to start with your A4 sheet of paper, normal size, and you're going to write down these 4 headings on the left-hand side of the screen: the Nazis and how they gained power, causes of World War I, Battle of Britain, and Battle of Stalingrad. You're going to create those headings on your page. You're going to write down as many things as you can remember, any pieces of information you can about each thing. Perhaps you might want to draw a couple of images on there, and lots of keywords. You're then going to fold your A4 piece of paper in half, and on the other side of the folded page, create a spider diagram of the main ideas of these 4 headings. You're then going to fold it over again, and on the smaller side, you're going to write down 5 to 6 keywords to do with those 4 headings. And then you're going to fold it again, and on the smaller side once more, you're going to write down some pictures. You're going to draw some pictures to represent some of the key ideas of the topic. Okay, so I've given you some visual instructions there. I'll explain it to you verbally. If you need a bit more explanation, you can always rewind the video and listen to the instructions again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to this lesson. Join me again next time for some more World War II. Thank you. I've been Mr. Windsor.